All right. Good morning, good evening, good night to everyone, depending on where you are in the world today. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited about this event today. And I'll introduce myself really quickly. My name is Bryn Lemon, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement and Scholarships for our office here in Goleta. And I'll go ahead and let Elizabeth introduce herself quickly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Janice Pearl, and I'm the Alumni Director here at UCEAP, and I'm very excited for our speaker today. I first met Ashley at our 50th anniversaries that we had in the UK in 2015, I think, a while ago.
Yes. So in 2015, I was actually a student in Scotland on my year abroad at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm just gonna go ahead and mute one of our participants today. If you have anything you want to say, please feel welcome to raise your hand and I'll unmute you. But I had the pleasure of studying abroad at the University of Edinburgh for a year, and I loved it so much that I wanted to move back to Scotland. And when I did, I had the absolute pleasure of having Ashley as my first ever professional boss. So I met Ashley 6 years ago in 2017 when I was working as an intern in the office at Edinburgh University for UCEAP. And my first impressions of Ashley were that she was incredibly stylish, intimidatingly so. Her bangs were always perfect. Her nails were always gorgeous. And I wanted to emulate her style in every way I possibly could. Then, of course, I noticed how incredibly intelligent and kind and hilarious she is. So I'm so excited that you all get to be in her presence today and learn a little bit about her experience professionally and academically. So Ashley worked for UCEAP for 10 years as the Scottish Parliamentary Internship Coordinator. So she led these wonderful classes on Friday afternoons about politics. And I remember I have this much interest in politics, and she actually was able to stimulate a little bit of intrigue for me. And I thought, oh my gosh, politics can actually be fun. And I always wanted to sit in on the classes, and I didn't often get the chance to, but I know that the students who took those courses were deeply impacted by them. And if you happen to be one of those students, please let us know in the chat today. We'd love to hear about your experience all the way back then. So she also managed the UCEAP summer physics programs and hold on. All right, we've got a lot of jumping chats today. So prior to her role with us at UCEAP, Ashley obtained her PhD in International Relations from the University of St. Andrews with a focus on the interaction between the third sector and government in Scotland and Zambia. And I would love to learn what that means and to understand it better. And I'm looking forward to hearing all about it today. She also studied and worked all around the world in Greece and the Netherlands, Zambia, China, Hong Kong, and the United States. And all of this was before she settled down in Glasgow, where she currently works as a curriculum development manager in academic policy and governance for the University of Glasgow. So it's a lot to fit into one life thus far, and I know there's so much more that she will accomplish in the next several years, so I cannot wait to hear about her experiences, and I'm so excited to present her to you all. So Ashley, please go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you very much, Bryn and Elizabeth. I'm blushing slightly because that was a really welcome, a beautiful welcome, and I really appreciate your kind words. You've set me up for quite a for quite a show, but what I hope to do today is to really share my personal experience, which I have been very, very lucky and very privileged over the past few years. And the key thing that I want to highlight today is how education has actually been my passport around the world, and how now in my professional life, all of the lessons that I learned throughout my travels, throughout these engagements with different communities, have really given me competencies which I use every single day. One of the key things that I wish to impart to yourselves, both as students and as graduates, no matter at what stage of life you're at, is that you should be able to articulate these experiences, not just in a romantic way or talking about, you know, your favorite part of studying abroad, but really being able to go in front of an audience, tell your story and use that narrative to really help leverage your situation, to show that your study abroad experience, your interaction with lots of different communities and cultures has actually enriched you as a person, but also helps to enrich the community that you then continue to interact with, whether that be within your work, your professional life, or within your social life, or with the communities that you're engaging with. So as you've heard, I have a long-standing and heartfelt appreciation and relationship with UCEAP. UCEAP was my first kind of professional launch into working internationally. And while I had a lot of experience internationally beforehand, I really got to interact with students who were coming from halfway across the world, landing like aliens in Edinburgh, which is cold, windy, rainy. It's beautiful, but it's slightly different to California. And what we had to do was to reassure the students, welcome the students, translate what was happening, both in terms of language, in terms of culture. And what we had to try and do is allow them to make Edinburgh or Glasgow or London or Dublin their home, but also to appreciate the differences and the constant difference that they would interact on a day-to-day basis, which is exhausting. So that was one of the big privileges that I had while working for UCEAP.
Really?
I also had the privilege of working with interns like Bryn. So Bryn came to Edinburgh, left and came back again, which is as a result, it tells us we're doing something really positive. But also it meant that I got to interact with people who were just at the start of their professional career. And it's been really, really interesting to see where these interns have gone and the stories and narratives that they have managed to articulate along the way. I was also very privileged in that I got to visit California. So I'd gone from working in the coldest office in the University of California in Edinburgh to actually going to sunny Goleta, which I really, really enjoyed. And en route, I stopped by Chile and presented at a conference. So it was a bit of a strange situation for a Scottish redhead representing the University of California in Chile, presenting a paper. So there was a lot of discussion around who I was and how on earth did I manage to be there. But that is one of the most exciting parts of all of this journey, is that sometimes you just don't fit. Sometimes you are the absolute exception to the rule, and it invokes conversation. It means that people will come, they'll speak to you, they're interested, and that's where narrative, that's where conversation begins, and that's where we start to appreciate difference and the richness that it entails. One of my proudest moments for the University of California was my opportunity with Elizabeth and Bryn to meet Randy Sheckman, who is a Nobel Prize winner. He is a professor at Berkeley, and in 2013 he received a Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine. And this was to do with his role in revealing the machinery, the key machinery that regulates the transport and secretion of proteins within our cells. Now that's all science, and I am a social scientist. I don't usually appreciate or understand what's going on there. But that night I did. I'm type 1 diabetic. And what is key about Randy's fantastic discoveries is that he helps me. He has helped me and my condition and people around the world who suffer with this condition. So it really hit home the significance and the beauty of his work. So as Bryn mentioned, what I'm here to do today is to share my journey and some insights into my academic and professional career. But one thing I want to share with you today is, before we start, is that none of this was planned. Absolutely none of these steps have been planned in a way that somehow they all kind of fit together. And that's the beauty of it all. And as I've said to you, education has really been the thing that has got me around the world and has allowed me to really travel, embrace and enjoy. But if we start back in 2003, this really is the story of an accidental Athenian. So as an undergraduate, I studied history, politics, and social and economic history at the University of Glasgow. So I was Glaswegian. I went to the University of Glasgow, and one really rainy Tuesday afternoon, of which there are many rainy Tuesday afternoons, my professor stormed into a Scottish history lecture. So again, Glaswegian, studying at the University of Glasgow, Scottish history. So there's not much diversity there. He was really quite flustered. And unbeknown to us, his prodigy, his Athenian prodigy, had just received word that they had been accepted into the Erasmus Mundus programme, which was an exchange programme. It's an exchange between universities within Europe. We were European at that time, thankfully. So he runs in and he's actually looking for someone to fill the spot. So I looked outside, it was raining. Someone had mentioned Athens, sounded quite nice. And lo and behold, I ended up 6 months later on an aeroplane going to Athens. And really that's about the kind of extent of it. I had the most fantastic and transformative year of my life. It was challenging, it was uncomfortable, it was a total juxtaposition. It put me out of my comfort zone in every single way I could ever imagine, and I absolutely loved it. And what's most important is not only did I find a fantastic group of friends, and I really grew as a person, but I also found my disciplinary home. In the Agora, with Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, I found out that I really absolutely adored and loved philosophy, but not as an ancient concept, within the concept and within the conceptualization of international relations. So this is where my academic journey, my true academic journey really began. And it was abroad. It was learning from professors who spoke many, many different languages. It was within a different pedagogical model than what I was used to. So traditionally within Greece, it was a very kind of rote learning model, but I was pushed to think critically in order to really encapsulate and take on this new discipline as well. Now, studying abroad, as we all know, has its ups and downs, but the mantra, and it's a mantra that I still use to this day, and I always told myself was, I can always be home by lunchtime. Now, I've been on 16-hour flights, so sometimes it might be Sunday lunchtime, but lunchtime nonetheless. And I think we can all share that idea that as long as you go away, and for as long as you are away, having that kind of resonance at home and that basis and that foundation somewhere where you belong is really, really important to be able to help you enjoy and embrace what you're experiencing at that time. When you go home, you crave more. So you're always checking, you're always looking for that next experience. And that really has been what governed, particularly in my 20s, my way in which I would decide where I would go next and what adventure I would partake in. So I graduated from Glasgow and I decided then to go to grad school. Now remember, I just found my disciplinary home in international relations. And I was really interested in concepts of security, not just in terms of foreign policy, but understanding the security of women, understanding the security of children. And at this point in time, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the Child had been something that had not only just become a material, but also it was hotly debated, particularly within particular countries where children were perhaps not recognised as individuals in their own right. So I went to the University of St Andrews and I studied international security studies, and I had an interest in the ethics of practice, the ethics of war, and also looking at the rules of engagement when it came to war. And I was particularly interested in the human right to play. So within the Charter of the Human Rights of the Child, one of the fundamental principles is that children should have a safe place to play. Now that seems a bit of a luxury, doesn't it? Particularly within a war zone. But what it allowed children to do, and what I can see with my own daughter right now, is the right to play allows children and adults to narrate a story, to play different parts within that story. So one day you might be the cop, I might be the robber, and we exchange that place the next day when we're playing. And we understand the rules, the social rules. We can test boundaries. and we can start to challenge boundaries within that particular paradigm. So from this, I ended up looking at an ethic of care, and this is where I caught the bug. So for all of you who may be sitting here thinking about a research career, or perhaps those who've already pursued a PhD or a research career, you need to have that fire in your tummy. Something really has to annoy you, and something really has to keep you awake at night, because sometimes these are long nights when you're pursuing your research career. But certainly this is what started to keep me up at night, and it was an ethics of care. The ethics of care principally is looked upon as a feminist ethic, and that really annoyed me because I see care very much as a human ethic. What I found also within the narrative of international relations and politics is that the state, as in governance, were perceived as particularly masculine, so therefore did not care and did not have the capacity to do so. And NGOs, non-governmental organisations, were framed as more feminine, touchy-feely, and therefore cared. So the issue that you had was when they came together, there was quite a kind of natural repellence within the literature. And what I wanted to do was to explore that actually, if we look through the lenses of care, is there an interaction that can take place? And can this render policy much more amenable to the needs of the community that is in front of us? So this is how I ended up in Zambia, which seems a bit of an obscure place. But at the time, the University of St Andrews had very, very close ties to Zambia. They had, through a project, they would take up to 15 students per year during the summer to work with particular communities around sport, around health, and we took students from all different faculties along with us. So I was very privileged in that I was given the role as head researcher on Project Zambia in 2010. And I was also given a scholarship and the ability to work with the United Nations. So it allowed me to get access to fantastic data, but also communities of practice and NGOs. I also set up a similar parallel research project within the Scottish Parliament, where I had lots of access to, by the very nature of a devolved parliament. So any parliamentary interns that are in the audience will be able to know that you can walk in, you can engage, and that is very much the nature of a devolved parliament within Scotland. So what I wanted to look at was the relationship between NGOs and the state. And I wanted to keep this lens, this very firm lens of an ethic of care. What I asked is how conversations between NGOs and the state, between informed, sensitive, aware stakeholders, could positively impact on policy making, making it fit for purpose, representative of need. And what I was trying to do was two things: practically show and highlight that the experience of NGOs and their ability to inform policy was intrinsically important in the success of a policy if they were invited around the table. And also theoretically, I wanted to show that the ethic of care was a human and not an exclusively feminist ethic. So my research is something that to this day I use these frameworks. And although I don't exclusively work within international relations as an academic anymore, I still am able to frame, I'm still able to use these concepts to apply to the work that I do now within strategy and policy for learning and teaching. But one of the most important things I want to show is that also I worked throughout my PhD, and that's what kept me motivated as well. So I served pizzas, I worked with students with physical and mental disabilities, I tutored, and I managed a research centre eventually in the Netherlands in Leiden. So what I want to share with you is also that while you're doing the things that really challenge you, you also have to carve out a personal, a professional, and just a life that is maybe slightly out with the confines of your research, because it allows it to gather dust, it allows you to get different perspectives, and it also allows you to enjoy the work that you're doing. So my professional career was really sparked by the fact that I just love working within institutions, particularly universities. If I'm honest, I've never left. So you may say, yes, she's absolutely institutionalized. You can see it, look at all the books behind her. But what I would say is I've really found my tribe. And in that, what I mean is there are so many diverse, different types of people that I interact with every single day that I honestly do not believe that I would find that within any other sector of work. So I'm very, very privileged in that perspective. I was then given a job in Webster University in Leiden, which is a transnational education unit. So Webster is actually based in Missouri, and we dealt a lot with GI Bill students, so students who had served within the military for the US forces, and then they had decided to go abroad in order to be able to start their transition into civilian life. So I worked with really, really fascinating characters, and it actually was quite disconcerting because often I was lecturing on policy, military policy, foreign policy, and it quite often was to a room of men and women who had served in Basra, in Iraq, who had been the first boots on the ground, quite literally. So what we were enabled to do there was to test theory with practice, which was absolutely fantastic. So my students became part of a really, really well-structured conversation. We're saying strategically the theory says this, but what actually happens in practice? So it allowed us then to have a critical conversation, a very mature conversation, and for us to be able to really pick apart theory and see if it applied to practice as well. We were minutes from The Hague during the International Criminal Court. There were many, you may remember that
I'm exhausted.
Oh, sorry.
I can't. We've got the Romanian.
Oh, sorry. You may remember that the former Bosnian and Yugoslavian Prime Minister had been tried in The Hague. So many of my students were very much linked to that due to their work within the United Nations, but also within the criminal court as well. So what I'm trying to paint to you is that while I've had a very, very colourful career, I have always come back to the idea of conversation and critical thinking, testing theories, asking if they can go a little bit further, or if indeed they're appropriate. And it's that critical eye that I feel, again, education as a passport has given me, because we've taken into consideration so many different perspectives as well. I now work for the University of Glasgow. So initially, my first role at the University of Glasgow was to manage international partnerships. So again, UCEAP, I became a critical friend over the other side, which was very convenient and very nice. And I managed the International Summer School. So if we've got any very brave physics students who came over to Glasgow to do the equivalent of 1 year of physics in 6 weeks, then hats off to you. You survived, and I'm sure you're doing fantastically great things. I hope we've not put you off physics for life. But what that allowed me to do was to travel and really use diplomatic skills. So I would travel everywhere from Hong Kong, China to California, and I would meet with different international university partners, and we would negotiate terms of engagement. So we would look at ideas of student mobility. We would also look at student culture, and if the students who were coming to Glasgow would be able to really truly be involved within the cultural landscape in Glasgow, and if not, then how would we facilitate that as well? We would look at the translation of degrees, which is a very key debate at the moment. If someone comes to study abroad, is it recognised, and how is it articulated when they go back home? Because the value that families and students are investing in their time and their education is absolutely key. And it's something which I feel very, very strongly about making sure that there is a translation, that there is an understanding of the principles and the concepts that these students are learning, but also the skill set that comes with that education as well. I'm also involved in CIVIS, which is the first totally European university. There are 9 partners within CIVIS, and what it does for Glasgow is it allows us to have a foothold still within the European Union, and we have a very active participation within the CIVIS network. I sit on the education unit for CIBIS, and what I'm really enjoying at the moment is that it's something very, very new. The university has no campus, it has 9. It doesn't have one type of student. It has an exponential number of typologies of student, because some students are coming from Hungary, some are coming from Glasgow, others may be coming from France. So that really puts in a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities for us to consider as well. Recently, I've also become interested in the decolonisation of curriculum, and this is something which, particularly within Europe, has become intrinsic into the planning, the strategy and the policy, but also the understanding of our successes and achievements and how we have arrived at such success and how our reputation has been built. And it's really understanding then what we need to revisit, how we should frame success, and also how we should frame decisions that have been made in the past in the current narrative and context as well. There is a great responsibility, particularly of ancient universities, to be able to come to terms with this engagement, and also to be able to really start as they mean to go on when it comes to tackling the challenges therein. So I'm very, very proud now to have gone full circle. I'm back at the institution that I started at, but I'm a completely different person, and I can still get home before lunch if I'm very, very quick and there's no traffic. But what I want to show you is that the investment that you're making within UCEAP is also where you started and where you might end up, or wherever you may end up. It becomes part of you, and it becomes part of a community that you will always identify with, and that you can always rely on, I suppose, to be able to give you opportunities like this, but also to kind of connect you to that network as well. Now, before I go, what I want you to think about is the way in which you articulate your experience as a study abroad student, the way in which you articulate yourself as a global citizen, because what I would say now is that the competencies that I alluded to at the beginning are things that I use each and every day. I expect differences in a professional and personal capacity, in people, places and situations. And I'm comfortable with change now. This is something that's taken a very, very long time, but I actually embrace change, and I see it quite often as very, very refreshing. I like to think of myself as empathetic. And again, this has become part of a learning process, but it's through meeting other people and different cultures. I like to think that I pay attention to what is not being said, the salient matters within a conversation, the expression, and quite often who might not be in the room when conversations are being had. And I like that I have the ability now to compare across cases and experiences. And I know where my comfort zone is and how to remove myself from it. So what my challenge is for you all today is to go away and think about your study abroad experience, your UCEAP experience within that context. It's lovely to look at the photographs. It's great to be able to remember who did what on one Saturday night where nobody spoke the language and nobody, quite frankly, really knew where they were. But what are actually the qualities now that you can see? You can pinpoint that study abroad experience, and you can link it back to there as well. You will always reap the rewards of your study abroad experience, but it's really how you articulate those skills and qualities that really then help you get that stamp on your passport that show education took you around the world. So thank you very much for your time today. If you have any questions about my research, my career, or my ramblings today, then please let me know, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was wonderful. Thank you for all of that wonderful advice for our alumni of all ages in our audience today, and for sharing your educational experience so far. We'll be around to answer questions from you all just now. So if you want to place your questions in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand and we can call on you. So I think I'll go ahead and do that now with one of our alumni here. Let's see, I think you can unmute yourself.
Hi, okay, cool. I'm off mute. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Ashley, so much for taking the time out of your day and sharing your story with us. I found it very enlightening. I'm currently in the process of weighing whether I'll accept an offer actually to go to Glasgow and study my master's in security studies. So it was so great to hear from you. Yeah, I'm just in the middle of deciding like whether to continue on with my career that has been going so well. And obviously there's a lot of quantitative analysis that goes on with that. And it's very clear what I have now and what I'd be giving up. And it's been hard to weigh it against, the sort of unknown qualitative future that there's so many things that could happen to you, but it's just, you can't know from now. So I didn't really have a question. I just want to say thank you. That was so great. I really enjoyed your presentation.
No problem. And congratulations on receiving your offer. I'm biased. Glasgow is great. You will really, really enjoy it, but it has to be the right time for you. So I think you're framing this in an excellent way, but also take a chance if you can, and if you have the opportunity to. Your master's year is a very intense year, but it's quick and it's short. And what you can gain from that year is invaluable, particularly if it is abroad, but it has to be the right time for you.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that question. If anyone else has any questions, again, you're welcome to raise your hand or place them in the chat here and we can read them out loud to Ashley. But I think that's probably a common experience for a lot of people, is being unsure whether to pursue, further education or maintain themselves within their career. I see we have a question in the chat now from one of our staff members, Virginie. So she says, you were talking about NGO and government and the difference in gender working for either. How would you explain, if you can, that some of the countries in Africa have women as presidents?
Yeah, so so my research didn't necessarily look at the gender split, let's say, as in how many males or females were in a particular role. What I looked at is the conceptualization of an NGO. It was perceived as a feminine construct or a feminine entity, and therefore softer, rather than being strong or masculine or having power. So it was much more to do with the discussion with that. However, to come to your question about there being very, very strong NGOs, particularly within sub-Saharan Africa, is where I was doing my research. And I found that too in 2010. What I find is that they were fantastic matriarchal systems within townships, within communities, within cities, much the same as I see in Scotland and I see all around the world. But it was the opportunity to sit at the table, and it was the opportunity to actually be involved in the policy-making process from the beginning, that was missing for quite a lot of the charities and the NGOs, and also youth as well. So particularly within Zambia at that point in time, there was no policy that actually recognised youth as a concept. So you were either a child or an adult. So it meant that there was a huge swathe of the population. Remember, it was a very, very young population as well. So 70% of the population were under the age of 30 at that point in time. But we didn't have a language or a label to label these policies to look at youth. So there's a constant narrative about how we conceptualize charity, government, NGOs, communities. And that was the thing that I was looking to clarify conceptually, so that we could really kind of analyze the value and the power that those particular groups had.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question from Mari, who asks, can you tell us more about your personal experience as a woman in Africa, the way people reacted to you as a woman and an academic? And did you travel throughout the continent?
Yeah, so my time in Zambia, I was there initially for 6 months, and then I returned back to the UK because I had teaching responsibilities, and then I went back and forth over the course of another 6 months or so. What was quite interesting is, you might not be able to pick on it right now because I have makeup on, but I am very I'm a very white, freckly Scottish redhead. So in a lot of situations around the world, I look like an alien to a lot of people. They're maybe not used to. I think there's only 5% of the world's population who have red hair, and I have very, very red hair, and it tends to be very, very curly. So actually the really interesting thing, particularly when I was in Zambia, not necessarily within Lusaka, the capital city, but when I was traveling, is that people didn't know what to make of me. They couldn't place me within a particular box. At the time I was 23, I wasn't married, I had no children. So quite a lot of the communities that I worked with had no cultural identification with me at that point in time. And also because I was working in what were quite often reserved male environments, it added another layer of complexity. So I had to be very, very aware of the power that gave me. I had to be very, very aware that at the time I was at the University of St Andrews, and as soon as you Googled that, Prince William and Kate appeared as the first headline in Google. So I always had to be very, very consciously aware of the principle of doing no harm. And what I mean by that is not alluding to anything that didn't exist or wasn't true, or using my power as a researcher to subvert the situation and get something out of the interaction that would be a bias or would in some way support the hypothesis that I had as well. So a lot of the preparation that I had to do was to make sure that when I was going into a situation, whether I was interviewing or working with a community, is that I had to do a lot of work before I went into the community as well. I had to introduce myself. I had to make sure that I understood the narratives, the constructs of the community I was going into. I had to know who the most powerful woman would be within the community, the most powerful man, and how I would fit in within that, that subtext. And also I had to give people time to get used to me. So I couldn't just go in for one day, ask questions and leave. So that's why it took a lot of time. And it was fascinating. I was embraced. I was brought in to communities. I was faced with many, many different questions that I just wasn't prepared for. And I learned so much because I was given a really, really warm welcome as well. But whenever you're conducting research, whether it be qualitative or quantitative, you have to understand that you automatically assume power, because people believe that you are coming in as a researcher and you have a basis of knowledge, which actually quite often you have no knowledge base whatsoever. You're looking to gain a knowledge base. So you need to be very, very careful about that relationship that you have.
Thank you so much. Great question and wonderful answer as well. As we wait for another question to come through, I remember you and I discussing 6 years ago, it would be now, your work in prisons teaching literacy. And I remember that conversation being really striking for several reasons, but I was wondering if you could just give a little overview of what that work entailed, because it was really fascinating to hear about it at the time.
Yes, so when I returned from the Netherlands, I had finished my PhD and I didn't really know, still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I applied for a job with local government. We call them councils, but it would probably be a county government or council office. Within Scotland, we have very defined boundaries, geographical boundaries. So I applied for a role within economic development in East Ayrshire Council. And East Ayrshire is an absolutely beautiful part of Scotland. However, due to its history as a mining area, a lot of the villages and particularly the town centres have become deeply deprived. And that is because the economic basis and where they used to profit and the heavy industry that the communities used to thrive and be very prosperous in has actually diminished and declined. And there hasn't been anything that has competitively replaced those sectors, those work sectors as well. There's been a slight increase in hospitality within Scotland, and quite often within the cities, it's hospitality that has completely eclipsed heavy industry. but we are still having a severe hangover. For example, like maybe Chicago and areas around Chicago may also experience as well. So I very enthusiastically got placed in an economic development team, and we were training officers, and part of our role was to work with, at first it was children who were graduating from high school in the 7% that had no qualification, but also could not read or write. So they'd gone through the whole schooling system, and because of many, many different factors, life had been particularly hard for these individuals, and they had left. Now, one thing to bear in mind, however, is that socially, the young men and women that I worked with within that category, they could read a room, no problem. They were often the smartest person in the room and were pocket philosophers as well. But they hadn't had the formal education, and therefore quite often hadn't been given the opportunity to approach employers or to have some form of sustainable employment as well. So it was bittersweet, because if given the choice, I would always make sure that I had one of these kids with me to be able to read a room, to be able to navigate a social situation, and really to be able to make sure that, that I knew what I was doing, particularly within that area. A lot of these children who were children at the time would then go on to petty crime and actually would end up within the prison service as well, and the prison system. So it was also my job to go in and teach literacy, and also to look at skill sets, where once the students that I was dealing with graduated from school, but also were released back into the civilian population, they would be able to have jobs and opportunities there. It was one of the most harrowing experiences I've ever had, because I was completely out my depth. And it was actually one of the moments that I thought, actually education is where I want to be, but I need to look at it from a completely different perspective. It's not about the highest level of achievement or attainment. It's actually about understanding what education can serve and how it can help an individual to really embrace what they desire, but also it gives them the opportunity to access things like the employment market, housing, to be able to read documentation related to health, particularly when it came to sexual health, drug awareness, being able to prepare things for their children going to school. And that's what, for me, education really became absolutely vital. It was a literacy side of things, to be able to go about the everyday and be able to signpost what they required, what they needed, how much money they were spending at a supermarket, etc. So it was really harrowing, and I can remember Bryn telling you all the stories on a Friday of what had happened, and a lot of the situations were just really funny, and they were heartwarming, and they were a lot of fun, and I still to this day know a lot of the now older men and women that I worked with, and they're doing great. They really have turned a corner.
Ashley, a lot of people on the call today might not be familiar with the Scottish Parliament program.
Yes.
Would you be willing to just do a little brief overview of what that is? I think it's such a great program here at UCEAP. So.
Yes, it is. So it is a brainchild of Hilary Noyce, who is the program manager for UK and Ireland. So in 2010, we had a very, very small group of students who were given access via one of the political parties, the Scottish National Party, to become interns within the Scottish Parliament. The nature of the devolved governance in Scotland is that we have power over domestic issues. So domestic issues being things like healthcare, education, forestry and land. But we do not have any power over foreign policy. So anything that you would see Boris Johnson talking about on the news, that tends to be a relationship with the US or Russia or you know, a whole host of foreign policy issues. So you don't necessarily see Scottish politics unless it's the independence debate on international television, because we're dealing with what quite often would be state level governance within a federal system as well. So it's slightly akin to a federal system, but not quite when it comes to governance. So we were very, very fortunate that we were given access to one of the political parties, and we were given places where the students were interns for 12 weeks within the Scottish National Party. Now, it's very, very different to being an intern on the Hill in Washington, DC, where you may or may not see the boss, and it may be at a drinks reception and there may be 5 rows at the front. This was up close and personal. So our interns then became, quite often, sometimes, one of maybe 2 full-time members of staff for that particular member of parliament. So they really were put through their paces. They were helping to research for parliamentary activity. They were looking at perhaps new policy agenda, where they were looking to bring more information, not only to their constituents and their communities, but also to their parliamentary member. And they worked there full time. And what we tried to do was to give them some context and give them some political understanding and history. And that's where I came in also with the courses. So Scottish Parliament, we looked at UK politics, we would go down to London, but also we looked at the charitable sector and NGOs. The students who participated, I have never seen growth like this in my life. The 12 weeks were hard-hitting and exciting, and they became part of the team. They became a recognisable part of the team. They were contributing, they were writing policy papers that quite often would sit in the chamber and were used by other members of parliament to inform their choices and inform how they may be voting and what decisions that they were going to arrive at. So if there's any parliamentary interns here today, then thank you very much, because you've always made a contribution, not only to the knowledge base for UCEAP, but also for the kind of civilian base in Glasgow and in Edinburgh as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's such a striking and unique program, and there is one based in Ireland as well. Presumably there are some differences between the programs in governmental differences. Are you aware of the differences between the programs for anyone who's potentially considering one over the other?
Yes, there are some differences. So the Irish parliamentary internship, I do believe both internships, have changed slightly. So the Scottish internship, now students will participate in courses at the University of Edinburgh, and then they will do essentially an elective within the parliament within an internship, which I would argue actually strengthens the offer, because you are then a student at the University of Edinburgh, plus you have this parliamentary interaction as well. And within the Dublin case study as well, students are working directly with parliamentary bodies. So quite often they can be working with either members of the parliament or with a think tank that helps to support parliamentary thinking and governance, and also policy and strategy around it as well. So they're both very similar. I'd say that the learning outcomes are very similar, but what the difference may be is if you would prefer to be within the office proper of the parliamentarian, or if you would like to look at it more from a kind of think tank and pressure group perspective as well. But both are very, very rich programs and extremely unique, in that as a Scottish student and as a Scottish citizen, I think I'd be given my right arm to have had one of those positions within the parliament. And as an outsider coming in, as in not being from that culture, that story, you get to ask questions that a Scottish person might not get away with, which is really quite nice. So you get to kind of push and challenge what has been happening, because quite often the norm for a Scottish citizen is very, very abnormal for a citizen from another country as well. So you can have a lot of fun there as well.
That's a wonderful point. Yes, I think that's a special talent of Americans, is to challenge yeah, from our perspective. So I think we're coming towards the end. So I'm going to wrap up with a fun question from Virginie, and our staff member again, who asks, what is your favorite part of the world that you've traveled to and why?
Oh my goodness. My current favorite part of the world, is that okay? Because I've got a lot more to see with my daughter, with Rosa in tow. My favorite part of the world so far has been, oh my goodness.
I'm so sorry.
No, please, this is fantastic. I would say Chengdu in China. And the reason for that is because I had to adjust almost immediately. So I was jet lagged. We were going to see the pandas the next day, so it was very, very exciting. And I, hand on heart, had not really fully understood that I would be constantly fed, and it was part of Chinese hospitality. So I was really enthusiastic with my first course. But I didn't realize that actually the part of the hospitality, I was going to be there all night, and I kept being fed and fed and fed, and it was so much fun. Our hosts at the university were they just wanted us to see everything. Everything was new, absolutely everything was new. I had never been to China before, I'd never been to Southeast Asia before. So all my senses were completely craving what was going on and what I was seeing. So I can remember feeling absolutely out of my depth, but really comfortable. And that's what makes it my favourite place. There are lots of very beautiful places in the world, but I think it's much more to do with the feeling and how you feel within that particular place, and the community and how they embrace you. And I would say that for it being so different, I felt really at home. So it was a nice little juxtaposition. So I would say Chengdu, the hot pot was absolutely fantastic. And the pandas were unreal, and our hosts were absolutely fantastic, and we're still in touch with them to this day.
I didn't expect that, but that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashley. I love that the one question you get stumped on is where's your favorite place in the world? Every other answer you have a fluent and intellectual response. So thank you so much. It's so lovely to hear about your experiences today, and I'm sure that everyone in the audience appreciated it just as much as we did. And we'll be sharing this recording with students and campus staff as well to encourage more students to study abroad, particularly on the programs that we've discussed today. And for anyone who's considering, graduate school, further education, I hope this was informative for you. We do have another video on our YouTube channel about applying to graduate school in the United Kingdom. So we'll try to link that with the recording of Ashley's conversation today, for further information if you're thinking about applying. And it was so lovely to just see you again and to hear all about your experiences afresh. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everyone in the audience. And if you have any follow-up questions, please do feel free to send them to us, and we will share them with Ashley, and I'll send her response back to you, and keep the conversation going should you be interested in pursuing it. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Great. Good night or good afternoon, everybody.
All right.